Greetings, friends. Wanningerzka here, and today I have two very special people on here. Two really amazing, hardcore Russian folks on our channel. This right now, we have these awesome Russian guys from Russians with Attitude. You guys know them. You guys love them, and I hope in this interview, I hope we could go a deeper dive into what makes these Russians with Attitude so tick. What makes them have such a really great show, and I just know more about them. And so, yeah, I welcome to the show, guys. How's you guys doing?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Doing pretty well, but I'm not sure we're universally loved, right? As you said, maybe we are hated. It's
Well,
both,
I
right?
guess it
But
depends. Depends on the. It depends on who you ask.
yeah,
It
it's great
depends on
to feel
your
some emotion, though.
it depends
Yeah,
on your political and maybe sexual orientation.
Indeed, that is
something
true.
like that.
Yeah. So I guess the first kind of big question I wanted to ask, you probably got asked this before, but what made you guys like start like your entire like Russians with Attitude thing? Like, what made you guys like? Do you guys always had to have like a background in like history and culture, or is it just like kind of more of a hobby thing that you guys just wanted to make a channel together? Like, what was the origins of your like?
Yeah. Well, Kirill is a classically trained historian, so yeah, he has a background. As for me, we did together a Russian show, actually, in Russian, on various things online, right? And then it, yeah, we decided that we both know English, right? And we also were interested in various circles of Twitter back then. It was called still Twitter, and to kind of show, well, the world or audience like the real deal Russia. That was the intention. We started the podcast in 2020,
Five
in
years
late
ago.
2020. Yeah,
5 years
5 years
ago.
ago. So
It's
yeah,
actually
it was.
actually today
Yeah.
is the 14th is the 5 year anniversary of the first video we
Oh,
uploaded
actually,
for
yeah.
7 years.
Oh, well, congratulations!
Yeah.
5 year
Yeah,
anniversary
thank
stream.
you. Yeah, exactly. So that's when we started the YouTube as well and Twitter. And yeah, we don't have YouTube anymore, but it's besides the point. We had a small, tightly knit, audience that really actually is interested in, various obscure history stuff and Russian philosophy and stuff like that. The mainstream American or any other English speaker doesn't care about. But we were fine. We were like doing exactly that obscure stuff that we are personally interested in, right? And then the war started, and we had to transform with the times and yeah, to cover what's going on there as well.
And what if you guys don't mind me asking, like, how did you have you guys like known like how did you guys like meet up like originally like have you guys like kind of known each other since like for a while, or did you guys like meet up online, or like how did you guys actually come together to
Yeah,
create
we
that
met
like?
online like 10,000 years ago. I don't even remember.
Yeah,
Like
I think it
2015,
was on Twitter.
probably 16,
Yeah, it
something like
was
that.
like 10 years ago on Twitter. Yeah, basically that.
Yeah, that's awesome that like how like you guys came together just somehow through online and now make have this like really cool platform that you're creating. It's actually really cool. Um, and so the next question I have for you guys is, in your guys's experience, and also just like what you've heard, like how has like since the war started like affected like Russian society, and also you could talk about through like the lens of your own personal life as well, like what you've seen, and also just like in general what you've heard from other people when they discuss things that have changed, like not just like about prices or anything, but just like Russians' attitudes, Russian like ways of doing things, and maybe a change in value systems, or just anything you want to discuss on how you think Russian society or culture has kind of changed since the SMO started.
Yeah, well, it did change significantly, and it warrants a huge study or a book on that, because it's a huge topic. But in general, I think what's changed is that, like, a lot of pretenses are gone, right? Before the war, there was a like kind of a limbo state with the Russian government and Putin calling the West partners, but then in the next breath it was not so much partners but rivals, but still we're good on good terms, and let's advance to some common, projects. And it was kind of an artificial life as usual, right? As Russia being just another country in this global village or whatever. And now it's not, right? It's not that at all, and we are once again in a very precarious and special and not entirely pleasant perhaps, but a very history defining moment and place. And that's basically what happened, and people are aware of that, because before that, um, politics didn't enter, or news didn't enter people's homes. And it was like you found your own entertainment in some sphere, and that's it. Like there wasn't this feeling of perhaps commonality, and now it's stronger, I think. um so it's a special place in history, and probably the most important event of the 21st century so far. So that's and it had an effect for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this quote. I think it was from Zhou Enlai, who was the chief Chinese di- diplomat in like the 50s and 60s, and he was asked something about the French Revolution, and he said that it's too early to say what the impact of the French Revolution was. And I think that's kind of how I feel about the SMO as well. It's just seismic changes to the entire post World War II world order, and it's the world has changed in so many ways that it's, I think, impossible to assess just yet how much it has changed and how much it will still change before this whole thing is over. Globally, and I mostly agree with what Nikolai said about Russian society. It has made things clear that were not clear before, so to speak, and drawn a lot of lines in the sand, and people have chosen sides, and it's all very it has been a severe mobilization in terms of, like, not in terms of military mobilization, but just of Russian society in many ways. Like, you have teenagers and grandmothers like donating to crowdfunding stuff and all, like making camel nets and all manner of things. Humanitarian aid is extremely big. Like people going to the Donbass, bringing various humanitarian aid stuff, and all sorts of things. I think Russian society has gotten much more involved with what's happening in Russia than it used to be, and generally people are much more aware of their position in the country, in society, in the world.
It's not that everyone is pleased with it, right? And there are
No,
people
of
who
course
are
not.
opposed to it actively or otherwise, or want to tune out, or some do and want to emigrate. But in general, the volunteer movement, not even war related, but in general, right, has become a huge thing, right? And also the internal tourism as well. It started in COVID, actually. A lot of these trends started back in COVID, when, because of the restrictions, people started, exploring Russia. Like Russians started exploring Russia for themselves, like other cities, and that's the process that we're living through. Yeah.
And do you guys think that the Russian government, like, a lot of people, even I've heard from other Russians that, before the SMO, the Russian government was like, pretty weak-willed, pretty like out of touch. Do you think that this SMO's kind of like gotten them more into shape and like made them more responsive to like the Russian government and nation, or do you think they're still out of touch? Like, what do you guys think?
Well, it depends on what anyone means by out of touch. Um, I think, yeah, it's an interesting question. Um, I think it's it's more involved, but in like people's affairs now than it used to be, and not everyone likes it. That's what I would say about that. So it's not out of touch, but maybe some people would prefer it that way when it's like separate, right? Government is doing boring government stuff, and we're not paying taxes and living free. That's the popular opinion, I think, in the Russian society. But
Yeah.
in some cases, yeah.
And in terms of Russia on like the world stage, and I don't think you can charge the Russian government with being weak-willed anymore. After the events of the last years, well, we've seen that Russia is literally the only force in the entire world. Okay, maybe the Houthis aside, they count. So, but other than that, Russia is the only major force in the world that actually like stands up for itself and is willing to go take the step of military escalation to protect itself. Whereas I don't know, countries like Iran, China, and so on, they just don't. They are much more weak-willed, if we want to use that term, than Russia is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had like my fair share of criticisms of how Putin has been like running the war. I do think he should have done a lot more things that he hasn't done until recently or hasn't done yet. But one thing you can't blame him on, though, is that he actually did start like this war. And I don't, a lot of people I don't think realize how big of a deal that was. Like, I think a lot of people didn't even think he was going to do it because of the way he's previously acted. But the fact that he actually started the SMO to actually enforce.
I mean, I didn't believe it. I mean, up until like 4 days before it started, I would have bet money that he wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, because like there's been no, like, as you mentioned, it's like a huge event in history, and it's like something that most people weren't expecting was going to happen. And so the fact that you actually did it is actually a big news on itself. And the fact that is, a lot of people weren't able to go that big step. And in terms of like, and one thing you guys mentioned about like a lot of people not wanting actually the Russian government to be more invasive is I remember when the Russia had incorporated those four oblasts. One big issue I heard a lot of people were saying is that actually, like in the DPR and LPR specifically in the Donbass, that they actually had a lot more liberal, like, well, not liberal. I guess the term is like more liberalized laws. Like there was like more open gun ownership and things like that. And now that they're actually officially part of Russia, there's like more restrictive rules. So that was like
I
one.
think it's not liberalized but anarchic, right? It
Yeah.
had a more of an anarchic nature, well, naturally, because it's a unrecognized republic that it used to be, and now as a part of Russia, of course, there are more regulations, and not everyone likes it, but it's a force for good, essentially, because it's not that like life in the Donbass wasn't that pretty, right, and still isn't, but it's good that you have freedom to some freedom to own guns or whatever, but at the same time the criminality and assassinations and crime and all sorts of things. I'm not saying that Russia has fixed all these problems in the Donbass, but it will eventually. There is no other way, right? It's
Yeah.
a civilizing force in that sense. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah, no, I agree. I definitely believe it was the right thing to do, and I really hope there's more parts of Ukraine does get incorporated back into Russia, and not even because it's not really Ukrainian. Like there's like no difference between someone who lives in Kharkov versus Belgorod. They're like the same people. Like there's no reason why
Yeah.
Kharkov can't be part of Russia. But um, but in any case, the in terms of like as you kind of touched on it, is that Russia, because it actually started to enforce its interests, it's now the most sanctioned country on earth. Have you guys noticed like how those sanctions have affected like your guys' lives or just the Russian society in general, or like how has Russian society kind of maneuvered around these huge amounts of sanctions that the Western countries imposed on it?
Yeah, that's the thing that we discussed earlier, that most countries just couldn't do it, right? They couldn't afford and wouldn't even survive this amount of sanctions. And a lot of countries and people are masquerading weakness as a virtue. Like, we are not doing full scale invasions. Well, yeah, because you can't, right? It's not because you can't, but you're a too moral of an entity. And that's the thing, that life in Russia, despite the literal millions of sanctions, is still quite good, actually, and quite normal. And that's the most interesting part, right? Because yeah, but the sanctions did affect a lot. Like, it severed lots of ties with Europe, right, with the EU countries. The financial sanctions that were imposed have also severed us with the global banks. Um, to some extent, that what it basically means is that when you go to Thailand, very popular Russian spot, right, of tourism, you need to bring a bag of cash with you instead of a credit card. And but it also boosted lots of local Russian made industries, like, for example, well, Russian banking was always good. Now it's uh, self-sufficient, right? It's autonomous. It doesn't really require Swift or any other things to function. And the same goes to some extent to the Russian internet, and lots of things like that. Is that like, imagine any other country being treated the same way? They would collapse. They would have nothing. No food, no electricity, virtually nothing. Starve to death, basically, and like that was the idea, right? Before the sanction, behind the sanctions initially, to like cut it off, right, from the West. And by doing this, we would descend to the Stone Age. They were already anticipating the complete collapse of the society, and were gloating like in the February, March of 2022. And it came as a huge shock to some that it didn't happen. And that's an interesting thing, right? That it's not really well established, but it's true nonetheless. So yeah, that's explains really a lot. But yeah, sanctions did affect the connectivity with the West. And yeah, some things are pricier now. Like all the sanction stuff still goes to Russia through Central Asian states. It's not a big secret, right? So it's like 10% pricier, maybe 50% in some cases, maybe 5. It depends on the seller. But yeah, so that's basically it.
I have a very niche question, kind of involved with the
Yeah,
sanctions. So, as you guys know, the all those like big like fast food chains left, like McDonald's and all that, and
yeah.
like out of that sprout out these like Russian kind of like equivalents. A bit of a weird question: how are like if you guys have visited those types of like those Russian like rebranded
Yeah,
stores, are they like? How's the food there? Like,
yeah, yeah.
is it just basically like the same food, or did they like make it like a new spin on it, or is it just, or how is it?
Well, I think that like Burger King hasn't left. Well, it still is there, and with the same name. So, but speaking of other fast food Western franchises, yeah. So it's virtually the same. I would say, right? It's no different, because the whole infrastructure, the whole, even people who used to work there, and the whole production lines are the same. Well, they just remain the same, but change the legal name and documents and the owner, right? But yeah, there is some new spin, I think, but it's not really new, but it's a bit more local, not in the cuisine. It's still, this terrible slop as in McDonald's,
Yeah.
still the same, but there. Yeah, I think that Вкусная точка is pretty successful. I'm not a huge fan of this cuisine at all, but it's pretty successful. Burgers taste nice, okay-ish, I guess, and the same as in McDonald's, to my memory. And they are doing like collabs with Russian movie actors more. I think like they're famous people in Russia more focused on that, like promoting. Oh, there's a new burger of this Alexander Petrov, the famous actor, things like that. But yeah, it's yeah, I think it's basically the same.
I remember a lot of you, like a little earlier this year, there was a bunch of Ukrainians that were trying to boycott Burger King. Like they were like chimping out and everything
Oh,
because
yeah,
because Burger King was still in Russia, as if like Burger
it
King's
still
the reason
is.
why
Yeah,
they're it's like funding the war effort or something like that. But yeah, it's yeah, that was just like an interesting thing maybe for Americans who are like, how is it like the new, just a little question I've always had. But now in terms of a bit of a more a for the Donbass or just Novorossiya in general, the citizens that were kind of in Donbass and Novorossiya. What do you think? Like how do like has there been any problems that between once they've got integrated into Russia? Is there like if you're a member of Donbass, like in terms of has there been like any problems with in terms of not necessarily integration, but like like in terms of making sure that they get like if they're able to like participate in Russian society in a way that like in terms of getting the right bank accounts linked up that connect to the Russian like money system, connecting electricity, water to the Russian system instead of the Ukrainian one, uh, or just like any problems that if someone from say Donbass wants to go to Russia, is there any problem them wanting to do that?
No, not at all. They all received Russian passports. So they have the exact same rights as any Russian citizen, really. Even more, there are some special programs for people from the Donbass, like for aid and stuff. There were a lot of refugees early in the war who went to like Rostov Oblast and so on, and so there was some
yeah.
trouble
There
with
was a
that.
program for Kherson, like
Yeah.
refugees from Kherson, I think specifically, that
Mm-hmm.
gave them certificates to buy apartments, like 5 million rubles certificates, so which is like $60,000, and they could use them and settle in any Russian city. Basically, the former people who used to live in Kherson and left with the Russian army in 2023. So yeah, but there are some problems with the water,
Yeah, in Donetsk
in Donetsk,
specifically.
though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
and Crimea as well, to some extent, because yeah, they're still they're not dependent, but yeah, Ukraine cut them off, right? And it's harder actually to the water supply is harder to do to Crimea and Donetsk than the banks and the rights and the passports and the certificates and stuff like that. And but it's work in process in Donetsk and also like a routine in Crimea. The these struggles, but yeah, it's just shortages are still happening in some places.
Yeah, Lugansk is much more similar to a normal Russian city by now.
Yeah,
It's far from the front lines. You have a lot of Russian feds coming in and cleaning up and stuff like that. So yeah, yeah, of course, it's still. I mean, the new territories, including Donetsk and Lugansk, they have martial law, which of course has some impact on life there. And but yeah, in terms of integration of the military, I think it went relatively smoothly. There were a lot of organizational hiccups with like, it's mostly just bureaucratic stuff, but I think it's mostly solved. Um, there is some. So basically, the thing is that with the start of the SMO, the contract soldiers, they have automatically renewing contracts, right? So basically, if you're a contract soldier, you're stuck until the war is over. And a lot of people from the Donetsk and Lugansk militias, they did not sign up for that, right? And there are also some units that were like disbanded, and some people ended up in some sort of bureaucratic limbo where they are like supposed to be part of the armed forces, but they serve in some unit where they didn't sign up for, and they are counted as deserters in one place and as active duty soldiers in another place. So mostly just bureaucratic bullshit. But like nothing too terrible, I think. But like they all have Russian citizenship, so it's no problems with that.
And how does like regular, like, people from, say, the old territories in Russia, how do they see these new Russians from the new territories? Has there been, like, do they just see them as, any other Russian? Like, has basically like the integration of them into Russian society been pretty straightforward, and there's not really or has there been any cultural differences? Like, obviously, Russia's a huge country with a lot of different, a person from Moscow is different than someone from more farther east, just in terms of because Russia's so big, there's always a different cultural aspect. But I'm guessing in terms of like how regular Russians see these new citizens, is it been pretty like straightforward, like straightforward in terms of like they just see them as regular Russians, or has then there been some hiccups with integration?
Yeah, well, I think the hiccups are very minor, and in general, they're by the very nature that they are Russian, have a pretty easy time to integrate.
Yeah, I mean, just
Uh,
objectively, there is little to no difference between a Russian from like Rostov or from Donetsk, like even in
yeah,
terms
so
of
they're
like
the same
dialect,
people.
culture, and so on.
It's harder. The integration process is much harder in old territories of Kafkas, right? Caucasus, for example. So yeah, it's compared to that, it's very minor. But yeah, I guess there are some anecdotes like a person from Kherson in Moscow would still, have a slight accent, and but yeah, don't really hear any such stories. I don't think. Although I think some people were jealous in 2023 when the certificates for
Yeah,
Kherson refugees were rolled out, and some old babushka would scoff like, "Huh, these Hochol freeloaders," something like that. But it's yeah, the it's the normal. It means that they're integrated, because it's a normal attitude to people in Russia, especially in some crowd. But yeah, no major stuff, I don't think. I think the more interesting question is that the city of Donetsk has kind of lost the cultural significance that it had, and because of the many problems, right, and being shelled for years, although nowadays they're rarely shelled, right, because the Ukrainians are pretty far off,
hmm
but still, the constant problems led to the exodus of young people to other places, right, and to Russia, old Russia. So I think it used to be a much more vibrant and culturally important place, unlike it is now. It's not yeah, the same, but it's very minor stuff still.
Yeah, and then I always thought, a lot of people think that, like, I always advocate that most of Ukraine should just become part of Russia. Like, if the western part isn't put, like that's not like. But I always think that if places like Odessa or Kharkov aren't back, like Russia can't be
Yeah,
whole until that point. But I mean, at that point, if you're going to take all that, you might as well just incorporate all of it. But like a lot of people are like, oh, but if you incorporate, people from Kiev or Lvov, that they won't integrate so well. It's like, well, you guys have like Chechens, and those guys are complete, really, but now they're like really great. Well, not great, but they now are
yeah.
participating in Russian society. Yes, they're Muslim and from the Caucasus, but like, they're pretty well integrated. So just since Russia's able to integrate them, I have no reason why I don't, I don't see why we can't integrate all of Ukrainians and all that, because
It's
they're
an
basically just
interesting
Russian.
topic. They're
Yeah.
basically just Russian, but with very, they have been under the influence and political hysteria even before the SMO began for more than a decade now, with a very advanced and very acute uh, case of political hysteria. So it's in some regions I believe it could be hard to integrate actually a lot of them, not because of the actual difference but perceived one or acquired one, like some person from Kiev could speak in Russian, right? And at the same in the next breath he could think like I don't understand Russian while speaking Russian. So there's some kind of a mental handicap induced by the television, which is great. Ukrainian television is a very powerful thing, and the internet and
Yeah, and
media,
Ukrainians
it's very media.
and one thing that people underestimate is how much Ukrainians still watch TV. Like, I mean,
Yeah, a
in like
lot, much
in
more than
Russia
in
or
Russia.
something, in Russia, or I don't know, in the West, anywhere, people under the age of 50 generally don't watch TV. But in Ukraine, it's still very powerful. Like, they actually do
They have
watch TV, and
interesting
it's
practices like telemarathons,
yeah.
which is like a show going for like 3 days in a row without any stop, like without stopping at all. And they're very proud of that. They're like beating the records. Our political program that in which we are hating on Russia lasted for 5 days straight. It's a real thing. So you can't really, yeah. And imagine like a person watching the telemarathon, in which they're like creating AI copies of Moscow and nuking it for 5 days straight without sleep. Yeah, it's hard, but it's doable. It's doable. I agree. And but in general, I think there are like some more Russian places and less Russian places in the Ukraine. And Odessa and Kharkov are definitely Russian. And Kiev used to be also very Russian. Complete Ukrainian language didn't dominate until like maybe a year ago in Kiev. But of course, it's the capital, and all the political and exposure is much even more acute there. But in general, I think that Kiev is a beautiful city, and it's a Russian city and a city built by Russians. So yeah, it's complicated. We'll see
Yeah,
how
I
it
don't know. I
goes.
mean,
It's not.
I'm
Yeah,
more skeptical of like actually integrating anything into the Russian Federation other than Odessa and Kharkov. Well, basically just Novorossiya and Kharkov, really. And
yeah,
even Kharkov. I mean, Kharkov, it's more of a security issue at this point because the city used to be Russian. Like Kharkov used to be
yeah.
the capital of like of everything pro-Russian in Ukraine, and it used to be that for like over 100 years. Um, simply because it was one of the largest cities, and basically if you live in a Ukrainian city, then until very recently you were just part of Russian culture because there was just no alternative to like Russian urban culture. But Kharkiv, though, on the other hand, you must say that Kharkiv has been turned into a Ukrainian nationalist stronghold in 8 years, between 2014 and 2022. It only took like they killed like 100 people. They put a couple hundred in prison, and 100,000 left the city. And that was enough to turn Kharkiv from a Russian stronghold into an anti-Russian stronghold. So on
Yeah.
the one hand, I am kind of optimistic about how easy it is to reform normies, because you just change the TV channel they're watching and their entire mentality changes as well. But on the other hand, why? Like why make the
It's a
effort?
strain on security and police and FSB.
Yeah,
It's a huge
yeah.
strain,
In
right?
terms of
Like,
Kharkiv needs to be
yeah,
sort of neutralized as a threat, because it's so close to the border and it's such a big city and big logistics hub and everything. But like, why do we need Cherkasy? Why do we need Kremenchuk? And why do we need Chernigov? Like, what possibly could we gain from annexing these territories? Like, the population is old and economically unproductive, and they've been brainwashed into being anti-Russian. Particularly Chernigov is Chernigov is more anti-Russian than places that are much further west in Ukraine. Like, Chernigov is probably more anti-Russian than Vinnytsia. And as
yeah. Well,
such,
it's also more Ukrainian than Vinnytsia as well, like culturally and linguistically. My
mhm,
great grandpa is from Chernigov Oblast, actually, and he knew Ukrainian pretty well, but he identified as Russian a
mhm,
100 years ago. But yeah, it doesn't really matter what, because the Ukraine changes every single decade, and the identity changes, and
yeah,
it's a very liminal place. And yeah, but to picture the integration process of some hardcore Ukrainians, one of the latest news from Russia is that there are there's rolls of cash being thrown on the playgrounds, on the children's playgrounds, on the streets, everywhere, and there is a small explosive in this roll of cash. And a child in Krasnogorsk in Moscow Oblast picked it up and lost all his fingers. Who is doing it? Well, that's for investigation to decide, but it's clear who is organizing
yeah.
this terrorist, right?
Just today, actually, there was at a shopping mall in Moscow, some retarded teenagers set fire to a movie theater, and it also turned out that it
Yeah,
was like paid like 2,000 rubles by some anonymous internet person, which, well, clearly that's a there's a Ukrainian program to do that kind of thing. They do it all the time, and yeah, it is unpleasant. And though, like, if there's anything Russia has a lot of experience with, is like counterterrorism and counterinsurgency.
yeah, but it puts a lot of strain on the
That's true. So
uh
I personally,
the
like if
services.
you ask me personally, I would like to see Novorossiya integrated. So Odessa, probably Kharkiv as well, but I would not go too far beyond that. I would very much prefer setting up some sort of, you know, puppet
Buffer
state.
zone.
Yeah, some sort of puppet, like Western Ukraine. Absolutely no. I mean, the Dnieper
Yeah,
is a good natural defensive line, but like anything like, west of the Dnieper and north of Odessa, I'm not personally invested or interested in that. Like, I don't give a shit if Zhytomyr is part of Russia or not. Like, it's probably better if it's not.
yeah,
What's your guys' opinion on like in the way from my estimation is that like the Ukrainian regime under Zelensky, I mean even if Zelensky wasn't there, just the like they're not never going to agree to any terms that would that would set make Russian security better. And I feel like we're not going to see that unless we see Russian tanks in Kiev again, and that to actually overthrow the government and install a new one at least. But like I don't think there's going to be like having a negotiated peace with them, like because you could write on paper like, hey, we want you to demilitarize or not work with NATO, but like we saw how they betrayed all those during the Minsk agreements, and there's no way to actually enforce that without having some Russian presence in Ukraine. So I think even if you don't incorporate like say Western or Central Ukraine, I do think it still needs to be like a puppet state. Like its independence should be like greatly curtailed. Like it's the leader of like that whatever's left of Ukraine should be under some sort of like puppet regime or something like that. Because I don't think like an independent Ukraine would ever like actually like try to like limit itself in order to secure Russian, like have to forward Russian security interests. So I think in order to actually secure Russian interests, there needs to be you need to reincorporate what was stolen from Russia in the after the breakup of the Soviet Union, like what you guys said, Novorossiya and everything like that. Maybe everything along the Dnieper as well, but then everything else should probably be under some sort of puppet regime or something like that. I don't really see how we could tolerate an independent Ukraine, but like that's just my opinion, though.
I agree in theory, but it also worth mentioning that significant part of the Western economic and technical power is aimed to prevent this scenario, right? And we're quite invested in preventing it. So it's not even a question of whether we should or shouldn't, but whether we can essentially. And we will see about
Yeah.
that. But yeah, of course, I think everyone agrees that that Ukraine presented a mortal threat, right? And it needs to be neutralized in the and it could have been like a beautiful bloodless thing if the Ukrainians would agree to very lenient terms back in March of 2022. They didn't, and the terms get harsher, and the reality as well. And yeah, it is what it is.
Another question I have for you guys is, let's say I added Vladimir Putin right now to this StreamYard, and and what if you guys had like the ability to talk to him? What would you guys say to him in terms of like, hey, this is what I think you should do differently? I guess it's a two-part question. Like the first question is, what would you tell him that you want him to do differently in terms of how he's handling the war? And second, just in general, like what would you want him to be doing differently, or what do you want him to be doing in general that he's not doing as just Russian president in general?
I think the answer to both questions is actually lots of North Koreans. In terms of military, I think. I mean, I don't know if they want to, but I think it would be wise to actually utilize the few allies that we have in the world. They seemed quite effective in Kursk Oblast, and I don't see why they would not be interested in getting more of their army modern combat experience, and why not use them in the Donbass as well. And the second part is it's a bit of a stretch to together, but also in terms of like immigration, there have been some positive legislative acts about immigration recently, but I would like to see more done with that. I would like to see a visa regime with Central Asia. I would like to see limits on guest workers. And I mean, if we need guest workers, I think we should also rely on our allies like North Korea. There have been North Korean workers in Russia for like 10 years, maybe 15 years, but very, very few of them. And I think we should expand that instead of like importing millions of Central Asians.
Yeah. And what about you, Nikolai? What do you think of what if
Yeah, I
Vladimir
agree
was here,
completely. I think that North Korea is the answer to all of our problems. But yeah, I mean, it's great, but I think that there is some concern on the Kim's part as well by investing like millions of their own people or whatever into Russian economy, because the system in North Korea might be, it's very powerful, I guess, but they're probably paranoid about lots of stuff, right? about security concerns and that and the other. So that could be a problem. But we need to kind of, make him. I think that start of the SMO really improved the relations of the country, and it showed Kim that we are kind of in the same boat, but not materially or ideologically, but that we are also not a part of the West anymore, right? In the military, otherwise. And I would like this process of to be even deeper, and it's just beautiful, right? This resort town that they're built, well, specifically for Russians, for Russian tourists. There is not a lot of Russians who want to go there because it's not tropical, right? But there it has some nice beaches and water parks, and the video was hilarious. It's stuck in my brain for like forever, probably. Kim opening up this resort city, and people like North Korean troops that are in their like enjoying the water parks to please Kim. That was cool, I think. Yeah, there is lots of stuff. But yeah, and just like the rest of the world and the West as well, we need some merit based immigration. That's the problem, like the global problem, right? And we are also facing it.
And what would you guys say to, because I've heard from some more like hardcore Russian nationalist people that they think Putin is having more of a soft glove approach to Ukraine. Now, obviously, I think he's gotten better as time has gone on. But I mean, a lot of people might point to like say, hey, why is the Ukrainian power grid still on? Like, why does Budanov keep having like the heat on and being able to like have water coming in? Like, why do these people get to live a normal life when they're committing terror attacks and using drones to attack, using electricity to drone Russian soldiers and Russian like oil facilities? Like, why? Like, are the Dnieper bridges still standing? So, what would you say to these more people who think Putin's not being as tough as he can be? Do you agree with that, or do you think?
I disagree with that very heavily. I think Russian military leadership is not does not base what it does on emotions, which I think is extremely good because the emotional approach to warfare that we see on the Ukrainian side is not very successful. I think like what turning off the lights in Lvov or something would only have a very negligent influence on the actual front line. And the problem with like turning off the grid entirely is that it would be a massive humanitarian catastrophe that has not been seen in anywhere in like the developed world since World War II. Like literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people would die, of civilians. And most of them would die specifically in the parts of the Ukrainian state that we would like to see liberated. And I don't think it's a good approach to like starve the people like you want to integrate into your country. Like I don't think it would be good for Russian war aims if we shut off electricity in maternity wards in Odessa. Like I don't think Russia would profit from that. So
Yeah,
like
it is a hostage situation in a way.
I understand the emotional desire to inflict pain on an enemy population, but it's an emotional desire. It's not a military strategic desire. Russia is damaging the Ukrainian grid and has been for years and causing huge problems for the Ukrainian military with that. But it's all a balancing act because like at some point it's just pointless aggression against civilians that doesn't do anything on the front line. Like yeah, we can bomb some whatever in Lvov and have I don't know, but how is that going to bypass Ukrainian defenses in Zaporozhye Oblast. What effect would it have? It would have no effect at all. We could waste expensive missiles on leveling symbolic buildings in Kiev. But again, what impact would that have on the front line? It would have zero impact on the front line. And the Russian military doesn't do symbolic or emotional stuff. And people want symbolic and emotional stuff, and it annoys them that it's not happening. But what's the point? I would not mind if we blew up the Bandera Memorial in downtown Lvov. I think it would be funny, but it objectively it would be a waste of resources and such. Yeah. Regarding the Dnieper bridges, it's people seriously underestimate how difficult it is to destroy them and how difficult it is to destroy large bridges in general. You remember the Antonov bridge in Kherson, and the Ukrainians bombed it for a month, literally. They spent 150 HIMARS missiles on it and large amounts of other ordnance. Still, it was standing when Russian troops retreated from Kherson, and Russian troops blew it up behind them. And it's very hard to destroy a bridge without having direct access to it. A bunch of FAB bombs would do the trick. But if you use missiles, it would take such a large amount of missiles that it's not worth it. You'd probably need 100 cruise missiles to bring down any of the really large Dnieper bridges. And it will probably get repaired more quickly than it can be destroyed. And yeah.
What would you guys say is in a more of a in terms of how this SMO has gone in your guys, since you guys have been following it since the beginning, as have I, what in your guys' opinion was the best part of the some really Kino or cool thing that happened during the SMO that you guys still remember or it sticks out in your mind?
Oh man, there's a lot.
There's too many actually. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
there's
happening almost daily, and people don't know that they're happening because not everyone wears a GoPro at all times, right? But yeah, just the latest clip that I've posted, maybe the speedboat war in the Dnieper, that's Kino, and and the rest is as well. But the most, it's hard to tell.
I think one thing that sticks out is so of course like every civilized man, I used to be a huge World War II nerd, and I was always extremely skeptical about the descriptions of some of the stuff that happened, particularly the air aces and the tank aces on the ground. If you read descriptions of what on the German side, Mikhail Wittmann did, or on the Russian side, Tyorkin, Kalabanov, it sounds fantastical and sounds completely unrealistic and impossible what these guys did. But then we had footage of the tank Alyosha that engaged an entire armored AFU convoy on its own and came out on top. And I think that had a huge impact on just how I perceive these old war stories. They are actually real. It's just now we have them on camera, and we didn't used to have them on camera, but now we do. And people are just as heroic nowadays. And there is a lot of this narrative that war is now bad and people can't be heroes anymore because it's so technical. But that's bullshit. People are just as heroic in this war as they've been in every other war that came before. And now we have more proof of them being heroic because there's so many cameras. And I think that, especially Alyosha, in that sense, had a sort of impact on how I perceived this war and previous wars as well.
One interesting thing that's also unique to this war that I think it also brings out more individual heroics than before, because now, the way the battles have been going on is, groups of just 1 to 3 people have to infiltrate this area, and they have to do it you have to rely heavily on yourself and do a lot more there's a bigger responsibility on you. Else before, if you were coming in as a squad, you could kind of like, you kind of are all working together, or like share the burden. But now that's only like 1 to 3 people having to infiltrate something, maybe attack a trench, or or infiltrate a stronghold, or try to enter this part of a town or village. There's a lot more heroic, it brings out a more individual heroic stuff from that, the like individuals as well. I think you see it with like these recordings of like just like 1 to 3 people like literally clearing like whole neighborhoods and doing their own, like, I mean, that's a big deal, assaulting something like just with you, maybe 1 or 2 other people. I mean, that's really heroic, I think. And one thing also, though, like you mentioned, like it's definitely true that they bring out more, like it shows that, like, there's a saying that, the war brings out the best of men, but also the worst, the best out of men, but also the
Mm-hmm.
worst out of men. But one thing I also found is I think it also discredited a lot of more, but just as it brought out that like there's those heroic stories we've heard in the past. A lot of that is true, but I think it also shows that a lot of like Western propaganda is like propaganda in terms of, like, for example, do you guys know that story about that Finnish guy who killed 1 billion Russians, that sniper
Mm-hmm.
guy? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that was just, I mean, maybe it's true, but like, maybe like, remember the beginning of the war? I mean, even now, Ukraine lies, like, there's like, I don't think there's like a bigger liar than Ukraine has. But like, remember like the ghost of Kiev and those
Yeah.
babushkas
Yeah.
throwing those
Yeah.
cucumbers and not,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's like,
The funny
like,
thing about the Ghost of Kiev is that if it was like the Second World War, it would probably be written in history books, right? The
Yeah.
legendary ace, the Ghost of Kiev, who killed 700,000 Russians. That would be actual history. A bit
yes,
like fringe conspiracy theories, saying, oh, maybe it didn't happen, or
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
he
It's
wasn't
historical
real. But
revisionism. It's historical revisionism,
yeah.
as you
It
say
would
that.
be terrible. It would be banned, this viewpoint. But like the snipers of the Second World War, yeah, highly inaccurate. And on the Soviet side as well, like there is myth of women snipers, female snipers
Mm-hmm.
who killed hundreds of the Germans, Nazis. Well, I don't really believe it for many reasons, for many reasons. And you shouldn't believe the Finnish war heroes, super duper snipers as well. It's kind of a Hollywood meme at this point. Yeah, but it's the first SMO is the first fully televised large scale war in history, because yeah, of course there are some of that in Syria, but it wasn't large scale. Yeah, um, and yeah, basically, and in the Iraq war, for example, the American Iraq invasion, they did have cameras, but it was all like mostly media based, right? The journalists would
Yeah. Yeah.
edit stuff out, or
The average soldier didn't have a phone or a GoPro. Yeah.
yeah.
and
And now it's a completely different world where we can actually verify stuff. Yeah, please go ahead.
oh no, sorry about that. But no, yeah, no, it's definitely like, this is, I think that also shows on terms of I think this was one of the first times where we have a completely, for the most part, open battle space. There's no such thing as, in terms of the strategic and tactical level. While as before, like you're playing on an open, with open information for both sides, and this is like one of the first times in human history where that's the case. While as before, you could, change the course of a battle. Like, even if you're outnumbered, you could, maybe if you did some sort of sneak attack, or accumulated some offensive, you could actually, change the course of the war, or like some operation. But like now, it's like you have a completely open battlefield with drones, and then also satellites and all that allow you to see where the enemy is like regrouping, where the enemy is approaching. And so like now it's like there's no, the surprise factor is very much limited. And that's kind of how a big effect on, like, I think that's why we have that attritional warfare instead of
Yeah,
machine guns and such, like World War I. Now it's like, well, how do we deal with this open space, battle space, where there's no way to actually counter it, you just have to brute force get through it. So I think that's like a big lesson that's being learned through this attritional conflict. And so what's also interesting is that also the war has flipped things on its head, in terms of like, now you actually want there to be like bad weather, or you actually want to be assaulting in an urban area, because if you're in an urban area, you're able to hide, or if it's bad weather, you're able to hide from FPV drones a lot more easier than if, whiles before you want to be out in the open, like plowing through, dry, open, sunny days with your tanks. But now it's like it kind of flipped the script and all that. So it's kind of interesting how there's like a lot of the rules have been flipped and all that.
Yeah. It also motivated some people to stuff themselves in the gas pipeline.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
yeah.
Oh, that was another Kino thing about the has been used in Avdiivka
Oh, yeah.
and then in Kursk and all that. Those were really Kino operations. Another thing, I have a question for you guys is you guys mentioned how like Kirill, they mentioned you have a history degree, and but you guys also are just in general history fans. You mentioned that's kind of like what got you into making this show, but what got you into just history in general? Like, what made you get a degree in history? Or what made you get or Nikolai, what made you get interested in history in the first place? For me, it was all these strategy, games for autistic people that come out and all that like like the Total War series and things like that. But what got you guys into it?
I don't know. It's one of my earliest childhood interests. I guess because of my dad as well, who's also very into history. So I don't know. It's like I started reading like historical novels very, very early. Like some of my very first books I read were historical novels, and I don't know. It's just always stayed with me. And of course, the games played a role as well.
Yes.
Deny that.
Yes, I remember. Yeah, so
I'm not a history buff myself. Yeah, but I'm a well-rounded, aristocrat of the soul. But yeah, I'm not. I wasn't big into the the Second World War, for example. But what I did like were the geographic. Oh yeah,
your autism card is revoked.
Yeah, so I really liked the maps, just regular, geographic maps on the wall, and memorizing the capitals and the country names and stuff like that. Very kind of normie thing to do now, but yeah, I was the best in it. But yeah, I don't have, acute autistic super interested, and it's great to have them actually, like this account on Twitter that specializes in Soviet pipe laying, right? Combination K and stuff. I think it's a girl, right? The girl account. So women are becoming autistic now. I'm just losing at all at all directions. But yeah, it is what it is.
And what is your guys' favorite part of Russian history and culture now?
Part of history. I have a very, what's that word? Bourgeois or whatever, like small shopkeeper mentality, really. And I like the best from the periods where Russia prospers and everything is fine, actually, not the calamities. Because I live here and planning and have a family and stuff like that, so nothing too exciting personally, right? But as a point of interest, there's lots of life in Russia is too interesting at times, right? And many would like it to be less interesting for sure, right? And to the interest, like everything is interesting, right? Starting with the Rus and times and the Mongol yoke and the Smuta, the time of the troubles, and the Romanovs. Everything is interesting. The Civil War, the Bolsheviks, it's too interesting, and I really like to contrast like the most boring decade, the 2000s, when I was still young and the people had more and more money every single year. So yeah, I like boring parts of Russian history and culture.
That's a very interesting answer. That's actually really interesting. What about you? What about you, Kirill?
Well, it's definitely very far from my favorite period of Russian history, but in terms of just academic interest, Probably, or the thing I've studied the most, the thing I know most about is probably the Russian Civil War, because it was yeah, such a important part that determined basically the next century of Russian history. And because I've always been fascinated with like how tiny the White Army was compared to the Red Army, and like the sort of insane miracles they pulled out of their asses so often, and just a very interesting period to me personally. Though, of course, it was a horrific period for the country and everything else, but it's very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's something I've actually just recently started. Like I learned a lot about like recent Russian history, but like 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 I love like recent Russian history, but like and kind of their older ones. But like that period after World War I, like that Civil War is like something that's always been like a black blank spot for me, and I want to like learn more about it because it's so there's so many moving parts to it. Like
Mm-hmm.
and it's definitely interesting in that respect. But as you mentioned, also very terrible for the country and all that. One
One day we will make a series on the Civil War with
Oh
Kirill.
yeah,
So
that's been.
yeah,
that's gonna be interesting. When do you think you guys are gonna like? Is that just kind of like something currently in development, or is that like
I'm not
something
going to give
that?
a time frame. I'm not going to give a time frame. Literally, when we started LWA 5 years ago, I went in with the thought that we should make a podcast series on the Civil War someday. So
Fair
not going to give
enough.
time frames.
it's
That's fair.
Chekhov's gun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. And what in terms of your guy, this is a double prong question. So, in your opinion, what is something you like about American or Western culture compared to Russian culture, and then
Yeah,
vice
well, I
versa?
thought about it today, and I like some parts of the American character more, and think it provides, it leads people to more success in some parts, right? And especially money related. Americans know how to make money and how to build, social networks and stuff. And the Russians are worse at it. It's not just that we are worse; we have a different social fabric. And there is a popular question that I wanted to expand on maybe in the near future in the podcast. But in the America, it's believed that Russia is a collectivist state or collectivist people in general, and just like the Chinese or whatever, right? And it's not really true. But at the same time, we are not collectivist, but we are not individualist. In the HBD sense, we are kind of a mix of like individualized collectivists, something like that, which is very peculiar, but it leads to very unusual social networking, I guess, and economy and stuff like that. But essentially, it's a bit like corporatism, but extended to the society at large, where people are like they are not really collectivist in the sense that they like they live in this mentality that my home is my fortress, right? And they build huge barriers, social barriers or physical, between each other. So in that sense, we're also quite atomized. But at the same time, to get big or to do anything in life in Russia, you need to be part of some certain small but powerful group. Not necessarily powerful, but you need to find a proverbial gang, right? To be part of, and that leads you in life. No, well, and part of the also some corruption, and as the typical Slavic things. But it's very important who you know in life and who you're running with, right? As and in America, it's a bit different, and it's more. Although there are also gangs and political clans and parties, but it's that an individual has more of a leverage to make it in life without necessarily sticking to one, group of people, um, financial or otherwise social, and that's a great thing. And also, Americans just know how to speak with each other better than Russians. There's they're more free, social. They're more social, and lets them achieve more things, right? And it's one of the reasons why they're pretty financially successful across the board, and like Americans individually. And I think I've picked up on something, and that's why we're here doing the podcast with you, to some extent, because like to the Russian mindset, right? Let's imagine, like, when I was trying to get some big Russian guest on, like he's famous and influential. He could refuse me just because I had a small following, or I was not known, right, to him. Like, who are you? I don't know you. Why would I do anything with you, with you being like a nobody, right? That's the approach of some or many Russian influential people. Whereas I think Americans are more free in that they can associate yourself with any stranger, and not necessarily if it's your guy or not, right? And they generate value out of it somehow, and that's, I think, an admirable trait that Americans have, and Russians don't, not really. That's my long-winded rant about that, but yeah.
I've noticed like the interesting thing that I like as an American is like, like I'm like, I live in a more rural place, but when I'm driving, I just like if I see my neighbor, I just wave at them, just or just say hi to them, say good morning. Like, and apparently, and not just in Russia, but I think Europeans in general, I've
Yeah,
noticed
yeah,
that
yeah.
like they're like, why are you smiling at me? Like, why are you trying to talk to
Yeah.
me?
Are you
And I'm like,
retarded?
yeah,
Yeah, sure.
basically.
Yeah,
And
yeah. That's the problem of European culture as well. Not a problem. I mean, it's just the way it is, like in Asia, in most of the world. And I think Americans have really developed some, well, at least back then, when things were semi-normal, but social cohesion on a different level, right? When you are expected to be nice to everyone because everyone is armed and can shoot you in the head, basically. And that's well, smart and interesting. And but of course, the social cohesion in the urban places in America is probably the same. And in NYC, people don't smile. They're
yeah,
very angry. So it changes with the locale, I guess.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's when you go into the more urban areas, it's a bit more they kind of become European, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in
Or
in
Russian even.
oh yeah, yeah. Another interesting you mentioned about how Americans view you guys as a collectivist is that I can't tell you how many people like after the war started that how many people legitimately thought
Mhm.
that Russia was still communist, that like the purpose of the
Yeah.
invasion was to impose communism on
Oh, yeah.
Ukraine, and it was so stupid. Like I thought like, okay, I know we're not really that well, a lot of Americans aren't well versed on geography in general or things like that, or but like come on, like I mean, do you guys really think but no, there's legit, it wasn't even like a joke. These people, like a lot of these people
Yeah.
actually think Russia is like a communist state or something. So it's very funny that you mentioned that. But
It was
um
even worse in like during the Russia Gate stuff in 2016, and like the smartest person from American commentariat would comment. Actually, guys, I know. Don't you know that Russia is not communist? And everyone was shocked. Yeah, it's inertia, but it's also artificial one, right? Because
yeah,
it's not hard to understand what Russia is, but at the same time, America really likes the year of 1991 or even earlier than that, when like they are kind of frozen in time. Like, we are the biggest superpower. We just defeated the stupid communist dictatorship, and the time is frozen. That's it. The end of history. And that's why they kind of don't bother to learn what's changed about the world. They're still attacking Russia with the old tropes of your HIV crisis, or you have heroin crisis, or whatever, from the year of 1993. They don't like to admit stuff, right? Especially that looks bad for them. And the abortion thing, it's a very popular argument. You have so many abortions and we don't now, actually. But
Yeah.
they don't care. The year
Oh
is
yeah.
forever 1991. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a lot of people want to use that to, when they're like, oh, Russia is not actually this traditional country, but it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
what matters is like the direction it's going. And if you actually look at the direction, like all those like kind of numbers you bring up are rapidly going down in Russia, while as they're actually increasing in the West. So, like you actually have to look at the trends, not just like pick a certain time 30 years ago and
Yeah.
just like think like that's
Well,
the
we
pace.
were like the first victim of many trends, and that's it. And like people with a straight face, like living in Belgium or wherever, would comment, "Oh, the Russian birth rate is collapsing." Like, have you looked at Belgian birth rate? Like, it does. It's ridiculous. But yeah, we were like the first, pioneer in all the bad things, mostly. So we've been through it all, basically, as a nation.
Yeah, it's and one thing I really admire about Russia is like the endurance of its people, and it's like like look at all the things they went through and like actually came over it, and a lot of times stronger than before. So I definitely, that's one thing I admire about it, is that I feel like the Russian people are very hardy and very are able to overcome a lot, and even when things get tough. So I definitely think that even with all the problems that happen, like I do think that Russia is like one of those countries with a people that could actually overcome it regardless of what happens.
Yeah.
And
Exactly. We survived like several apocalyptic events. One of them being the Civil War, the revolution, the collapse of the USSR, and yeah. So I guess we can survive it for the third time as well, even fourth time, or even fifth time if you include the Mongol yoke, the time of troubles. Yeah, it's an ongoing. But yeah, that's why I like the boring periods of Russian life, and because yeah, they're far and rare in between. But it's also a double-edged sword, because recognizing that Ukrainians are, well, mostly Russian in not in politics or character, but by origin, they're also quite hardy. So in this war, that's what we're seeing.
exactly. Um, so I know you guys mentioned you guys only have about an hour to do the. So I'm gonna start wrapping up here. I just have one or two last
Hmm.
questions, just so I
Mhm.
could free you guys. You guys could keep enjoying uh, Russia here. Right now, it's literally the middle of the night here, so I need it. I'll have to go to bed
Oh
after
yeah.
that, but I hope you guys will be able to enjoy it. But last few questions before I free you guys. Is one thing is how technically this war in Ukraine kind of started in 2014, as they say, but a lot of people criticize like how, like, obviously Russia took Crimea, which I think everyone supported, but well, obviously in Russians in the Russian sphere. But what do you guys think should have been done differently when the 2014, like when the Maidan revolution happened, and then when the Donbass had that uprising? Like, do you think Russia should have done the full scale invasion then, or do you think just doing that limited incursion was the best move, or what do you guys think should have been done?
Um, I think the position that there should have been a much wider intervention in 2014. I regard it personally as vindicated. I was of the opinion back then when it happened. I'm still of that opinion. I think in the long run it would have been a lot both cheaper and would have avoided the current war. Since, well, the Ukrainians didn't have an army in 2014. They were literally defeated on the battlefield by coal miner militias and lappers, like literally. And the big problem was, so Crimea. I'm taking Crimea out of the question because it's just so is just such an intense injustice that Crimea was ever not part of Russia that it's so ridiculous. And like, even in the West, no one can with a straight face argue that Crimea isn't part of Russia. Like, it's just impossible. Even Ukrainian nationalists can't argue that with a straight face. It's completely impossible. And whereas with Eastern Ukraine, the Donbass and so on, it's a bit more complicated. But in general, I think, yes, I think we should have gone all in 2014. I think they would not have slapped us with the amount of sanctions that they have now. I think the Ukrainian army would not have been able to put up any resistance. And negotiating about sanctions and European security architecture is a lot easier if your tanks are at the Polish border than when you are in the Donbass. So, yeah, I think the big problem is that back then these considerations were not really made by the Kremlin or the military, but basically all of it was run by the energy sector of Russia. They were basically given complete diplomatic control over what happens, and they are obviously in favor of peace and everyone calming down, everyone just and solving everything with money, which doesn't always work and didn't work in this case. But yeah, the Minsk agreements were, again, they were, from the Russian side, they were almost exclusively run by Russian trade and export interests, by the energy lobby, by the oil and gas lobby, and not by like the government itself or the military. And that's why they did what they did.
What about you, Nikolai? What do you think should have been done in 2014?
No, I agree. Like, it's fake. The sometimes not launching the war is the evil option, and here it obviously is, right? Is the because sometimes, yeah, launching the war is the only way to save lives, paradoxically, but it's true, very true in this case, because if the war is inevitable down the line, you need to do it faster rather than slower. And there are a bunch of, considerations that Russia didn't have our own SWIFT type system before. So the sanctions on the banking system would actually collapse the banking inside Russia. And the capitalists didn't really like that, right? At the helm, they didn't really like being impoverished and not generating profits and finding out new ways to make money, right? So it was not governed by the strategic and
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
interest in mind. Yeah,
It was purely economic interest. And yes, there are considerations. Like, Russia wasn't as close with China in 2014
yeah,
as
that
in
too, that too.
2022. And there are a lot of considerations, but overall, I think just the uh, overwhelming military situation on the ground. Like, the Ukrainians had something like 5,000 combat capable men in 2014. 5,000. And that's why they had to build all these volunteer nationalist battalions like Azov, because they didn't have an army. And they spent the next 8 years feverishly building an army and putting all their resources and all the Western resources into building an army to fight Russia. And I think the military situation on the ground would have been so overwhelming that the West would not have any choice but to negotiate. And again, it's one thing to negotiate about sanctions relief when your tanks are like stuck in front of Great Border. And it's a completely different thing to negotiate about sanctions relief when the Ver paratroopers are taking a dip in the Tisa River.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's I think that was also a bit of, in terms of like kind of being a bit more of a cautious. like in terms of like I remember in the beginning of the war that Russia wasn't even striking like military barracks. Like it took a little while for them to start actually like
Hmm.
you would think that'd be like one of the like even regardless we talked about the energy sector before, and you could have make as you guys mentioned that there's an argument like you have to take into account the how that might create a humanitarian catastrophe, so you have to kind of balance that with knocking out electricity being used for all the military factories. But regard like things like striking military barracks that's just like a duh that's just but I feel like in the war in the beginning like the war was being like when Putin mentioned the SMO, I do actually legitimately think he obviously I don't think he expected this to become this long attritional conflict. Obviously the 3 days to Kiev was complete horseradish, like complete just complete bullshit. But it is true that they probably didn't expect I think they wanted a repeat of what happened in Crimea, where they were able to take it without really fighting anyone for it, and they thought the Ukrainian military would just completely collapse. But I think
Yeah,
that was
I mean, at that point, the not striking barracks thing, it kind of made sense. I mean, it only lasted for a few weeks, and it did make sense at the time because no one expected it to turn into industrial mass warfare, as you said. It was a glorified police operation. It was like a gimmicky force of like the convoy to Kiev that came from Belarus. It was like a gimmicky convoy of parade troops with like Ukrainian bloggers sitting inside the cars and Ukrainian politicians.
Anti-riot
And
police.
yeah, and
Yeah.
the job was like literally the expectation was that the Ukrainians would surrender and they would install some corrupt party of regions guy as new Ukrainian president, and everything would just go back to the way it was before the Maidan revolution. And no one wanted to annex anything. They were even going to push the Donbass back into Ukraine at that point. That was the plan. But I guess no one expected that the Ukrainians would was so brainwashed that they would all literally rather die than have better living conditions under a different flag. Like something went really badly wrong with like the ideological side of things, and I mean, I suppose no one really expected that the West would go all in so hard. You have to consider that the Ukrainians did surrender. They did sign those early peace agreements. They did agree to them, and only after that, they shot their own negotiator in the head and went back on what they said and continued the war. Like they did sign a capitulation basically, and they went back on that. So it's yeah, it was diplomatic failure early in this. More diplomatic failure, intelligence failure. The whole thing should have been done differently. But on the other hand,
Yeah,
like
I think
if it had succeeded, I think it would have been pretty bad. Like they literally would have made Donetsk and Lugansk part of Ukraine again under a very nice, supposedly pro-Russian, fraternal, anti-fascist government in Kiev, and nothing would be solved strategically. It would literally have just pushed back the problem a few years until the next government came along.
oh yeah, exactly. That's why I
next
don't.
Maidan, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. But in one way, we should be thankful for Boris Johnson for preventing Putin from cucking out and all that. But
Yeah.
obviously, on
And
one hand,
Zelensky as well.
yeah. Oh yeah,
Our elephants, as they say in Russian, right? Boris Johnson and Zelensky, yeah, the Russian nationalists who want Russia to take Kiev.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's also ideological problem, and of the whole generation of the ruling class of Russia is that they, well, the 90s were pretty great for them, including Putin. It was a great time actually because they got to reinvent themselves, and they were middle age, in the 90s, and they got to reinvent themselves and get a lot of money, like to fulfill all their needs, material or otherwise, that they lacked in the Soviet Union. And they kind of got to that idea that we don't need ideology, but we need money, and money can fix everything, right? And it was true for them. Like money could fix everything, and they carried on this non-ideology to to the entire country when they got to power. That's the thing, and Ukraine was developing or degrading in a different direction into the more ideological direction. Not saying that the Ukrainian leadership were not stealing enormous amounts of money. They of course were, but they were feeding their population like a strict diet of ideology, condensed ideology, and Russia didn't, right? And that's why they kind of fooled themselves in a way with their recon and everything, that it's possible to do the police operation on the highly ideologized enemy, and it's not, apparently. And no cash will buy you um, anything, the victory, right? You can't buy it, even if you have lots of money. So yeah, a very interesting historic lesson for the everyone, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned type thing happening from this conflict that I think will make Russia stronger. And I think, obviously one big thing is after the war, Russia will be one of the most military ready countries in the world. And, there's going to be a lot of experience, not just in military conflict, but also just in general, how to handle literally the entire NATO bloc trying to sanction and bring your country down, and having to find your way, like maneuver in that environment. And so I definitely think there's a lot of lessons that aren't going to be coming from that. And last question before I'll wrap it up, so you guys could be on your way. But so if someone's interested in visiting Russia, what would you guys recommend places to visit, things to do in Russia?
We have a podcast. Well, we have a couple of tourist podcasts from the past, like from
Mm-hmm.
2021. You can check them out, and also we have a newer one with three Americans who often visit Russia or live in Russia right now, and they're telling all the tricks and tips on how to get to Russia, how to do the documents, the visas, the everything, up to the interrogation on the Russian-Mongol border. So go check that out. It's I will. Oh, it's for everyone, right? It's free. It's on our Patreon, but it's free. And let me check it how it's named actually. But while I do that, just go to Russia to not only to Moscow, but not only to Moscow and Saint Petersburg, which are a must, right? But also you can check out Kazan, Yekaterinburg. The Vladivostok is a very interesting place to be. You can even go there by train and spend a week in a Russian train. I think it's a great idea. So yeah, and our episode is called. It's from September of 22. How to stop worrying and go to Russia. Our listener's guide, and it's a huge podcast, like 2 hours long, and they say a lots of information that I had no idea about because I never. Well, um, I'm not a migrant, right? I'm not a tourist, and they like a migration card and this and that and lots of little details and how to navigate the map without a GPS, which is a problem in the center of Moscow because they're shutting down GPS at times, right? Or most of the time. So yeah, that would be your next sequence from segue from this podcast, I hope.
That's actually a great yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I was actually going to ask as a follow up, like, where do you like, what do you recommend for someone who wants to visit? Like, how would I do that? Because I always thought, like, since this conflict started, that it's like probably a pain in the ass to be able to actually go there as a Westerner or an American. Like,
It's
you'd
not
come in.
major. It's not a major pain in the ass, actually. Yeah, not really. You just go via Turkey, Istanbul, and that's pretty much it. And have a Russian visa. That's pretty much it.
Sweet. Yeah, I thought it was like a pretty hard time, but luckily it's like for people who are interested, it seems like as long as you're doing everything correctly, it should be pretty an easy process to visit. But yeah, I think Russia's a really beautiful place, or at least from what I've seen. I haven't visited before, but it's definitely on my list. I remember growing up with, as I mentioned before the interview started, about kind of growing up with this Russian culture. Like I remember my grandmother, she would make like pimeni and plov, and
Yeah.
these type of Russian cuisine stuff. I used to call oatmeal kasha all the time because that's what my grandma called oatmeal kasha. Um, and
Yeah.
so I kind of grew up with this Russian cuisine, Russian language, like some part. And I remember we had two Christmases: the regular Christmas on December 25th, and then the one that my mother celebrated, which was on sometime in January 7th, I think.
7th.
Yeah, 7th. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, because we had the Orthodox Christmas and all that as well. So, definitely have that. Like, I feel like I have that much, like, even though I've never been in Russia, but I do kind of have some sort of connection to it. That's why I really have a more of an interest in it compared to other armed conflicts. That's why I autistically follow it every week, talking about, how, following the war all the time, because I really do, even though I'm an American and everything, that I do have a bit of an affinity for Russian. And thanks again, guys, for being on my show here. I hope my YouTube channel brings a lot of people to your guys's show. Obviously,
Vice
YouTube.
versa. Yeah. I wish well to your podcast endeavors.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. Yes.
thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah, thank you. And it was a great honor. And you guys seem like a very educated, very very good, like outgoing people. So I really appreciate you guys bringing kind of your thoughts, your and everything,
Thank you.
and everything. So yeah, thanks again. I'll link your guys's. A lot of you guys who watch me probably already know who these people are. We follow the war in Ukraine a lot, as which is what most of my channel is about. But I'll definitely, if you guys don't know, it's Russians with Attitude. There's a link to their I'll link their Twitter and Patreon in the description, so you guys could follow them. They have a ton of episodes in their Patreon, so make sure, and a lot of interesting big historical stuff. You're into that is there as well. So be sure to follow them. And as you guys saw here, they're really great guys. So they're so go over there. So that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this podcast with them. Be sure to subscribe to my channel to continue receiving these interviews that I hope to do more of, and also obviously with my weekly Russian-Ukraine war update videos. And hope you guys like this video, comment your thoughts, share this video around, and hope you guys have a very blessed day.